everybody, to yet another episode of Past the Wire TV with myself, Jon Stettin, my co-host, Jeff Metz. And first off, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for watching our first couple of videos. The response has been pretty good. We're more than happy with the response. And not to make anybody jealous, but Jeff and I are probably in two of the more advantageous locations in the country right now with all the snow and freezing weather, because Jeff is in beautiful Southern California. I'm in beautiful Southwest Florida. It was a beach day here. I don't know about over there, Jeff, but it was a beach day here.
Yeah, a little cloudy, but this last Saturday and Sunday at Santa Anita, sunny and nice, and you could tell by watching the races on TV. You know, it was nice. So I feel bad for the people in the Midwest, you know, fighting the snow and the ice and everything like that. And it's hurt the races too, because a lot of cancellations due to snowy conditions. I see people putting videos of Oaklawn and Turfway, and it's just covered with snow.
Right. And Oaklawn, you know, they've the last couple of years had their problems with weather and cancellations. And I think this weekend they had a couple of big races. They had the Razorback and maybe the Smarty Jones. They had to roll over to next week. So
yeah, I believe because of the hot springs in the area, they're not allowed to put chemicals on the track. And that's one of the reasons sometimes they delay training. Sometimes, you know, a track will open at 5 or 6 a.m., but sometimes I heard Hot Springs at Oaklawn Park was not opening until sometimes 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and then they would train until the afternoon because the track had to thaw out naturally with no chemicals in it.
Now, before we get into the topics on tonight's show, which I think are going to be interesting, let me ask you a question about that as a trainer. When you have a horse ready to run in a race like the Razorback or the Smarty Jones that you've been pointing for and is on your calendar, and obviously you're working your horse and training your horse with that date in mind, and all of a sudden you get that weather, the race gets canceled, then only a week later. Significant impact, not so significant? Like what does it do? Does it hurt or help the chances? Does it matter? Depend on the horse? Like, can you give me a little insight into like how does that play out?
Well, I think a lot of times it really depends on the horse. Like maybe you had a horse that was coming off a pretty hard race, so an extra week is actually advantageous. That works out good. But you may have a horse that, you know, bruised his foot and you need a couple extra days. Again, that is advantageous to you. Now, on the flip side, you got snow and the track's closed, so a lot of these horses are jogging indoors. So you're making them jog inside the shed row. You know, that's about all they can do. And so now you got a horse that's peaking for a race, a graded stakes, and you got to jog them in the indoor shed row. So they could kick the wall, they could kick the stall, and that extra week of pent up energy could be too much to handle for certain horses, especially these high strung stakes horses. So I think it depends on the situation, but anytime you want to bring your horse up to a feverish pitch for a race, you always hate to have to put it off. The other thing that, you know, you want to be safe for everyone, the horses and the jockeys and everything. But, you know, a lot of times everything's planned around that. You know, the owners are coming into town. They've already come into town, something like that. So there's a lot of the jockey was coming. And so there's a lot of moving parts that when things get pushed back a week, it really changes. Because if you had a jockey or two coming in that weekend, they took off their mounts at their home track. Now they got to maybe take off again the following week. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. So, and again, now you got the jockeys that are, you know, in racing fit shape and they have to take a week off. They haven't ridden. Not that it's the end of the world because they're going to stay in shape, but you got the horse, you got the rider and everything, you know, anytime you got to put it off for a week. And when it's weather related, because like I said, these tracks are frozen and they just can't train. I see videos of trainer friends of mine that are jogging in the shed row, and you can only do that so long. And a high strung thoroughbred is an accident waiting to happen sometimes.
Now, let me ask you this. If you've got a horse that's, you know, coming to the race, but really needs to train to be at his peak on that day, that last week, maybe needs another work or another gallop, and all of a sudden that gets taken away from you, could your horse wind up a little short because of that downtime or that having to jog him in the barn?
It could. You know, a couple things that happen that I think kind of flies under the radar and trainers don't talk about it or owners don't hear about it. But sometimes when a horse, it's a thing called tying up or muscle cramps. Right. And so when a horse isn't exercised fully, can't get that lactic acid out, sometimes when they do go out and the rider has to hold them down and they overdo it, they come back and they muscle cramp and they tie up. So sometimes it's mild and sometimes it's more major. And so it's one of those things that having that muscle cramping could cause a problem a couple days later. The other thing that I think happens is not so much that you're short in the race, but you're actually too keen and too eager. A horse that might relax in the race might run off with the jockey and he just won't settle and relax in the race. So now the jockey's fighting him, trying to get him to settle, and he expends too much energy early in the race and he doesn't finish. So it might on the outcome look like, wow, he missed a week, he came up short, when in actuality, he went over the edge, he peaked too soon, he was too high and didn't get to get enough exercise, like you said. And some people will train their horses the day of the race and let them get a little energy out. And also back east, which you don't see as much out on the West Coast, is in Kentucky, you see this a lot though, and Florida at your track Gulfstream, they head from the pony, they take off and they go and gallop on their own pre-race. So there's all these little subtleties that when a race gets pushed back like that I think could be problematic.
Interesting. And so I guess you could wind up with a horse that, like, sometimes we see horses coming off a layoff and they're, rank or a little keen, and, the horse may be the kind of horse that sits or comes from off the pace, and all of a sudden he's fighting for the lead and the rider's got to kind of either choke him or just let him go and get away from him.
And from watching enough races, whether you choke them or let them run, neither one 9 times out of 10 end up good, because if you're fighting them, you wear the horse out, and if you let them run, you don't conserve their energy. So right. You're kind of in a no-win situation. But I do notice that when horses are coming off layoffs, they're fresh and they get right into the race a little quicker because they're just eager to get back in the game, especially if they've run before.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's always as a bettor, it's a horrible feeling when your horse comes out and he's like that, because like you said, you kind of know you're lack of a better term, no good if you do, no good if you don't, because
yeah,
either way, it's going to end bad. I prefer honestly, and no scientific basis for this. It's just a preference. I'd rather let them run and try and get them to settle once you kind of give them their head and let them run a little bit, and then try and get them to settle. But I never like when they're kind of like rocking chair or holding them. I hopes to run out of them.
I've watched videotapes and races for a long time, and whenever I see that live, I'm like, oh, that's not going to be good. Whether it's one of my horses or one that I'm betting on or watching or whatever, but I'll say, oh boy, my jock's pulling. That's not going to be good, right. And I think it just pulls the run right out of them. Another thing, from a training standpoint, is sometimes the horses displace their soft palate when you pull on them too much. And so when horses really spit the bit, they look like they bled, but in actuality, they displaced their soft palate, ran out of air, and so they got tired. So, yeah.
Interesting. Before we get into our main subject, which I think is a subject that a lot of people don't talk about, the claiming game, and whether or not the claiming aspect of horse racing in the United States is good or bad for the game and good or bad for the horse. We're going to get into that and kind of deep dive that a little bit. But before we do, we're going to talk about a fundamental of racing. And, when I was taught by my dad as a little kid to read the racing form, first thing he told me was the first thing you should read is the little thing on the top before the past performances, which at that time, he just called it the conditions of the race. And, at the top of the past performances for each race, they'll list the conditions of the race. And I imagine they copy and paste that right out of the condition books. They've changed a lot how they write races and the way condition books read, from back then until now. But I learned that the conditions of a race are something that a lot of handicappers ignore, but you as a trainer know you guys can't ignore it, because it's kind of like, your playbook for the meet, so to speak. So we're going to talk a little about the condition book, what it takes to read it. If there's any truth to the saying that, oh, this trainer's great reading the condition book, this guy's not so good with a condition book. I mean, is there a good way and right way to read it, or is it just picking out the spot that your horse is eligible for. I mean, let's get into that. We did get a request from a watcher to talk about the condition book. So let's go.
So definitely the condition book is like I'd say any racetrack you go to, you'll see 9 out of 10 trainers with the condition book in their back pocket. It is kind of their go-to Bible, and it has the dates of the races. So you're planning on the races that you want to run in, and they also have an index which will tell you, okay, you know, I got a 20 claimer, it's a 3-year-old filly, and I'd like to go short. So I look in the index, look for, okay, 20,000 fillies going short, and we go to that date and see what the distance of the race is and stuff like that. But they also have conditions, which are non-winners of 2, non-winners of 3, and occasionally at some tracks, non-winners of 4. What happens is sometimes some tracks will write non-winners of 2, maiden race is not considered. So you could actually be a non-winners of 3 because the maiden doesn't count against you. So when you're reading these conditions as a trainer, and definitely like if you're playing the races as a handicapper, you know, the parentheses, when they say maiden races not considered, or claiming races for 10,000 or less not considered. So this horse has 4 wins and he says he's in a non-2. How is he eligible for this race? So there's always that little, I'll say fine print, but it's the parentheses of the conditions. Now, the other thing, that's the condition book and what we go off of. And so we'll target a race, and then we'll work the horse, train the horse up to that race the way we think is the best possible way for that particular horse. Lighter training for some, heavier training for others, and then we point for that race. The other person that's got a condition book and is the jockey agents. So they are always looking for, and what they do is they are always on the lookout to see if they can get the best possible mount for their jockey. And so what they do is they'll, some jockeys with a very popular jockey, they go ahead and they'll take a couple of calls, and then they take their best one, and then they'll drop off on somebody else. They call it spinning. So you have the call with the jockey, and then last minute they'll say, hey, Jeff, sorry, I got to ride another horse, you know, so-and-so. They put one in here late, and unfortunately I have to take off of your horse. So some trainers, they get very upset with this, and they're like, I'm never going to ride your jockey again, this and that. Other people, what they do is they say, you know what, we are going to, you know, we had a chance to ride your horse, and now they're going to go ahead and stick on it or take off. So when they have a top jockey, unfortunately, their agents get away with that. But when they have a smaller or lesser known jockey, they spin people, they lose business. So unfortunately, when you got the person that everybody wants, the top jockey in that particular area, they can kind of get away with spinning people, and they're still going to get the ride for them because they're the best jockey and you want them as many times as possible. So then we go to, you know, training up to those races. And these condition books come about every 2 to 3 weeks, they come out. And so it allows you to train up to those races and get ready. And then what happens, I think, on the racing office side of things is, so you'll have maiden races for fillies and the boys, and short and long. And then every 2 weeks, you have a couple of new group of winners because these maidens win, and then they're ready to go on to the winners conditions. But the thing that you won't find in that top of the form or program where it says conditions is in California, what they do is if you win a race on the grass, you can still go on the dirt and it doesn't count against you. So allowance non-winners of 1 on the grass, you win that, you can still come back and go allowance non-winners of 1 on the dirt. So, but that's like, I don't want to say an unwritten rule, but it is, it's one of these things they write on the overnight. And whenever there's entries 2, 3, or 4 days before the race, they have the overnight with extra races. And so not only do you have the condition book races that you're working with, but you have the extra races on the overnight, like races that had 4 or 5 horses and they didn't quite fill. They bring them back as an extra. A day or 2 later, maybe they get 2 or 3 more horses and then they use that race. Or a race in the book only gets 2 or 3 entries, and so they don't use it. They need these other extra races to help fill. Now, do you have any questions that come to mind on the condition book?
Yeah, a couple actually. You know, I remember when the condition book was really straightforward and there was a limited amount of of conditions and races. You had maiden special weight for fillies or colts. You had maiden claiming for fillies or colts, you know, obviously turf and dirt. Then you had claiming different levels, you know, claiming the bottom in New York back then, I think was 7,500, 10 down to 9, and you got a pound or two off if you ran for the 9 as opposed to the 10, 12, 5, 16, 20, $25,000 claimers. And that was really the only condition, you know, claiming 25,000 down to 22.5, you know, 25,000, 119 pounds, 22.5, 116 pounds for 3-year-olds and up, colts and geldings. And that was it. It was a very short, easy condition. The allowance races, or what today I would say they call the optional claiming races, were, you know, non-winners of a race other than maiden, claiming, or starter, non-winners of 2 races other than maiden, claiming, or starter, non-winners of 3 other than, and it was very simple, straightforward. Now, when you read the conditions, they're a full paragraph, and like you said, there's all these little gimmicks and fine print and parentheses. This race doesn't count. Races for 10,000 or less don't count. You know, you can have won 10 races and run in a non-winner or 2 if you're eligible for a claim. You know what I mean? So it's a non-winner or 1, but if you run for a $50,000 tag, you could have won a dozen races. So
that's one of the things that a lot of tracks around the country have gone to allowance and then an optional claiming, because they were only getting 3, 4, or 5 horses in the allowance race, horses that were eligible for the allowance. So a horse that had won that condition could come back again and run in that race if they went for the claiming price, optional 40,000, 50,000, 62.5, stuff like that. And it just added a couple more horses to make that race go or to help it fill. But in some jurisdictions, California versus Kentucky, so to speak, in California, the allowance horses get preference and the claim horses in for the claim get second preference. So if you're in for the claim, you might get on the also eligibles. But in Kentucky, my understanding is everybody gets the same draw. It just goes by date. So an allowance horse wouldn't exclude a horse in for the 20, 30,000 or 40,000 optional claiming. So every jurisdiction is a little different. And I think as a trainer, that's where we have to really study and learn where we're racing, the conditions, the way they're written, when they change, that we're on top of it, and those type of things. Because like I said, there's things that as an owner, you know, owners read the condition books, they know when the races are and they say, hey, when are we running in this race? Then there's extra races that sometimes they don't know about, but as they learn, they could get the extra races on the overnights. And then the third thing is when they make announcements in the morning that the owners definitely don't hear about most times. So it's a team effort between the racing office, the trainer, the jockeys, agents, and the owners. And we all try and, do the best we can and put our horse in the best possible spot. And oftentimes you want to put them in the easiest condition for a chance to win without just giving your horse away for a lot less than it's worth.
Right. So then, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's obvious that the reasons that racing secretaries, who are the ones that write the condition books, have gotten creative and introduced all these new conditions were basically to fill races, because the races that used to fill years ago no longer fill. No, so if you ran a straight non-winner of 2 races other than maiden, claiming, or starter, you probably wouldn't have enough horses to get a full field, correct?
That is correct. Like we talked on our previous show with the 1 and 1A, 2 and 2B with the entries. Now they just want as many numbers on the tote board as possible. And, some tracks even write horses that have not finished first, second, or third at the meet, which, that's smaller tracks, and they don't want those horses to just retire because they're not hitting the board. But it's funny, you'll get a 12-horse field of very competitive horses, and that actually makes for a pretty good betting race. Now, they're not the world's greatest horses, but they're a competitive bunch, and they make another race on the card, and and often handles pretty good. The other thing is, let me know what your thoughts are, but I remember in New York, I think, in California, sometimes it's hard to fill a non-winners of 3 allowance, non-winners of 4 allowance, but I think the New York breds, they were able to fill like non-3s, non-4s.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think West Virginia is another one, and I think in those jurisdictions, if you win the state bred, then you could go all the way back to an open allowance non-1 and still be eligible for that, because like you said, maiden, claiming, starter, and some tracks say or state bred, which
Right.
would mean New York bred, Cal bred, West Virginia
Right.
bred.
Absolutely. Or now I think they go even further. Instead of saying state bred, they say restricted races, which
is the same thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can kind of, if you're creative, you can kind of find other races that may qualify as restricted.
Yes. Like a starter allowance. A starter allowance is a good, horses are started for a certain price. And then when you see a horse, I'm blanking on the name, but you get a starter allowance horse that's eligible, and they win every starter allowance, and they're usually eligible for 1 to 2 years. And so that's, some horses do that. Nobody wants to enter against them because that horse is going to be 3 to 5, 4 to 5.
I just thought of a horse named Steelwood, an old Frank Martin Sigmund Summer horse that won a race for like 10,000 and became eligible for 10,000 or less starter handicaps, and wound up winning about 20 in a row over a 2-year period at Aqueduct in the wintertime, because he was just better than that. They got away with running for 10, and you just couldn't beat him. He won just every week. He'd win the starter handicap.
Another thing that I think is nice for these warrior claiming horses is the claiming crown. Horses, these blue collar horses, they get to run for some big money in the claiming crown, and they just have to qualify and run for a certain level. And if they have a race that they qualify for, they get to run for some big purse money at the claiming crown.
Absolutely. Now, here's the $1 million question for the bettors. Okay. I remember the non-winner of 3 and non-winner of 4 straight allowance races. Most of the time they were like stake races, because a lot of the good stake horses would use those as progression races and to prep. We don't see that anymore, but we do see the optional claimer, like we mentioned, where, non-winners of 3, other than maiden, claiming, and starter, or horses that are entered for 50,000, or non-winners of 1. Let's use that. That's a better way to phrase this question. Non-winners of a race other than maiden, claiming, or starter, or horses eligible to be claimed for 50 down to 45,000. Now, sometimes in those races, you'll see a nice horse that broke his maiden, okay, but didn't do anything else. And then you'll see a nice salty horse that's won 5 or 6 races, but all for 25, 35,000, or open claiming races, maybe even for 50. I tend to look at and upgrade a seasoned horse that's got 5 or 6 wins under his belt over a horse that has just that 1 win, even though that 1 win horse might be, quote, a nicer horse, a more expensive horse, a more valuable horse, and potentially a stake horse. But on any given day, I lean to the salty, grizzly veteran with a couple of wins, except in one case, except if I think that 1 win horse is, quote, special or really nice or grade 1 quality or just lights out faster than the others. So am I on the right track as far as giving an edge to those salty, grizzled, multiple winners against a one-time winner?
Yeah, and I definitely think that the seasoned horse with multiple wins, I think that one has an advantage. It has the experience advantage. It's tasted the winner's circle more times than just that once. And so I do think that is an advantage, that this horse is seasoned and has the racing and has the wins under his belt. Another thing that I see is a horse that goes up the ladder. He wins for 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. Now he's in allowance non-winners of 1 because he's rattled off and he's earned his way up to that allowance race. And so they're going to run for more money, and they're going to protect him now being in the allowance race and not being up for the claim. The other thing is sometimes you'll see horses in, let's say it's an optional 40 claimer, and you run for the 40 tag, even though you're eligible for the allowance portion, and you can win that race and then come back next time and run for the allowance. Because even though it's allowance optional claiming, if you're in for the price tag, it's considered a claiming race for that particular horse on that day.
Right. Interesting. I mean, it does get complicated, but so you're in agreement for the most part. The multiple winner gets a little bit of a nod of an edge over a one-time winner for just the experience and whatnot. Now,
yeah, I would say that, because I think sometimes you have a horse that's going up the ladder and goes into that race off 3 or 4 wins, or you have a horse with 4 or 5 wins and is just trying to maybe drop out of the stake company and wants to go in for the high claiming price in an allowance race and kind of get his confidence up. So I think you have some scenarios where that horse with more wins could have an edge over that one-time maiden winner.
It took me a while to really get my arms around that. And I'll tell you why. There's an old saying around the racetrack, and it's probably a saying in other areas of life as well, Jeff, and it's class tells, okay? And when I first started learning about racehorses, something was illustrated to me that stuck with me a long time about class in horses, and it ties right into this conversation. And you know, it's not so true today as it was years ago, because the game has changed in so many ways. But I remember when it was pretty much almost gospel on the racetrack. But you could take a $25,000 claimer, okay, who's a very consistent 6 furlong, $25,000 claimer, and he's fast and he runs, you know, 6 furlongs. So it's about every time he goes to the racetrack, 109 and change, 110 and change, boom, 109 and change, 110 and change, 109 and change, 110. And now you put him in a race against a stake caliber horse on a solid allowance, not one or a 2, not one or a 3 horse that runs 111 and change, 112, but against better company. And you put them in the gate together, and the thing that would jump out to a lot of handicappers, well, this claiming horse is faster. He runs 9 and change, and you know, someone runs 12 and change. He's never run 9 and change. And they come out of the gate and they run in 112 and 4, and the stake horse beats the other horse by half a length.
I've seen it at short distance and at long distance. And I've seen owners say, yeah, my horse is running this fast time. 108, 109. Why can't we go in the stake? That stake went in 110 and 2, you know? Right. And so, but what certainly seems the case is when these horses, they break, and I don't want to say a cheap horse for lack of a better term, but, you know, a lot of horses can run 21, 44, but they can't all run 108, 109. But some do. But when it gets to that class level, for some reason, the top of the lane or headed down the stretch, that's when the class prevails. And it really, I always, whenever owners ask me this question, I kind of give them the example of when you're in middle school or high school and you're running track and you're running next to the guy next to you, and, you know, you're looking over and everything's looking good. Then you start to straighten for home in that last turn, and that guy looks over, you're giving it everything you got and you're right with him, and he just hits another gear. And it just almost breaks your heart. It's not that you slow down, and that's what I think happens to horses. They just get this feel like, man, he took off and I just can't go with him. And so then they get a little deflated and they'll kind of coast in, or they'll try. And you know, an honest horse is going to try. They're going to run to the wire, but they can't run it as fast as that class horse. And, you know, every once in a while, we'll see a good horse, a good grade 1 horse, like you say, you know, he shifts into Charlestown or Laurel, and then some hometown horse that's hot, 4 wins on that track, David beats Goliath. Right. But what happens is he loves that track, he loves that surface, and he runs a 110 buyer, and he's never run it before in his life. Right. But 9 times out of 10 or more, that classy horse, class prevails down the lane. And it's just one of those things that unfortunately, thoroughbreds, unlike harness horses where you can compare time because they run the same distance, 1 mile, 1 mile, 1 mile. But in thoroughbreds, they have different distances, different tracks, different surfaces, turf, dirt, deep dirt, stuff like that. And I just don't think you can compare times like you can in some other sports.
Yeah, no, and you know, to me, that was always a very fascinating aspect of the sport, that class tells things when you have those 2 horses and, you know, on paper, oh, this one's faster, but this one's classier. And you know, they run slower and the classier one still finishes ahead of them 9 out of 10 times, which is, to me, a very fascinating thing that's very hard to scientifically explain.
A similar thing that kind of parallels that is, so in my area, we have 3 tracks within like at Santa Anita, you go 6 hours north and you have Golden Gate Fields. And if you go 6 hours east, you have Turf Paradise. So those are West Coast tracks that are running right now. And if you have a 10,000 claimer at Santa Anita, it seems much tougher than a 10,000 claimer at Golden Gate. And the Golden Gate 10,000 claimer is a bit tougher than 10,000 at Turf Paradise. So even though it says 10,000 claiming, I think it depends on what track these horses are coming from. And even though the number's the same, the competition is not.
Right. No, for sure. Now, all very interesting stuff from so many different angles and different levels. The game is a lot. It's simple yet very complicated when you get into all of these different things. And I agree. And one of the biggest challenges for handicappers, and one of the things that I think launched buyer numbers and speed figures and Ragazine and Thoroughgraph, which I use and stuff like that, are how do we compare $10,000 claimers from all these different racetracks when they all ship to Del Mar, to run over there, and they all ship to Saratoga in August to run over there, and you've got a field of a dozen $10,000 claimers, and they're coming in from 4 or 5 different circuits. I mean, tough to evaluate that. It's definitely a handicapping challenge. So it pays to know, and even if you're a trainer and you're looking to claim a horse or want to know realistically how good a shot you have running for that 10, it really pays to know how tough those races are at all the different circuits and stay on top of all, the different circuits. Like, even if I'm not, I only bet 2 or 3 different racetracks, but I'm aware of what's happening in all of them because I may have to deal with that scenario in one of my plays someday. I imagine it's the same for a trainer. It's good to know, who the tough bonds are, who the tough horses are, where the tough circuits are all across the country, correct?
Yeah. And let's say, you say a turf horse. Well, not all turf courses are the same. So when a turf horse goes from Santa Anita to Del Mar, or Del Mar back to Keeneland, or Keeneland to Gulfstream, every course is a little different. Some are deeper, some are firmer. Some horses like it differently. Another one is Turfway Park. So they just redid their surface. So they still are with a synthetic surface, but they redid it and have a new synthetic surface. So if you try to go off the form like, oh, this horse ran good at Turfway before. Yes, but it was a different synthetic. Will he like this new synthetic? I mean, even though they're, the little synthetic marking of the track, is it, do they like it as good as the previous one, or do they like it better?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And knowing, one of the things I love now in betting is that exact angle. Okay. Knowing how certain turf courses play and watching those horses go to different turf courses that they might like better, i.e. an East Coast horse that I know doesn't really like soft turf or turf with a lot of give in it, wants a harder, firmer turf course for whatever reason, or has some speed and is just getting, not getting the right trips in New York, ships out west onto those, harder turf courses, a little bit more speed friendly, and they win. They just, they hit and that.
The other thing with some of the turf races that I think some people, keep in mind is sometimes they set the rail at 20 feet, 30 feet, 10 feet, or at 0. So that means the inner rail is either right at 0 down close to the rail, or it's way out on the course to save that lane of grass, to save their turf course. And sometimes when that rail's at 30 feet, it's very hard to close because they have to go even extra wide on some of the closers. And sometimes the speed horses have a little bit of an advantage. So sometimes where the rail placement is in turf races can be a factor as a trainer or as a bettor.
Yeah. I tend to ramble, so you gotta bear with me a little. I love horse stories and some of these horse stories. I'll share a funny story with everybody. That's I guess we'd have to call it a bad beat story, but it ties into that whole horse for course thing and trying to capitalize. Years ago, there was a horse out in Southern California by the name of Festin, Festin. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if you were out there back then, but he was a stake horse out there, and he just could never win. And back then, that's when Santa Anita, Hollywood Park, they were known as like speed highways. Everybody went 21, 44, 8 and change, and wire to wire, wire to wire. It was very tough to win from off the pace. And this horse would lag way behind and come flying, come third, second, fourth. They'd always finish in full of run. And there was no simulcasting or anything at all back then, okay? And he shipped in, it had to be 1990 or 91 because I had just moved to Florida, okay? And I had bought a condo on the beach and I had no furniture in it, okay? Was living on cardboard boxes, basically looking to get furniture, you know, but had the condo, so we were happy on the beach. So, you know, it was nice. And this horse shipped into Oaklawn Park for the Oaklawn Handicap. And me and my brilliance said, you know what? This horse is going to win because now he's running on a racetrack that's honest and closers win on. He's on all those hard California tracks. He can never win there. He's going to win. Eddie De La Houssaye is going there to ride him. He's his regular rider. I want to say Ron McAnally trained him, but don't hold me to that. My memory's not that good anymore. I'm like, this horse absolutely has to win. There was one problem. I didn't have any money to bet. So I told my wife at the time, I was married at the time, I said, listen, you have great credit. I have terrible credit. I need you to do something. She goes, what? I said, I want you to get a cash advance for like $2,000 on your credit card. She goes, why? I said, I want to take you to the track and bet on this horse. She goes, what, are you out of your mind? I says, listen to me. I know you don't like gambling, but this horse I know is going to win. She's like, you can't know that. I'm telling you, he's going to win. Trust me. I talk her into it. Okay. So in my brilliant state of mind, I drive to Calder to bet the horse. Okay. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to watch the race there. I'm going to go back home, watch it with her. It was the feature race on the show, if you remember, The Wide World of Sports. Mm-hmm. Okay. They were showing the race on The Wide World of Sports. I didn't realize it was on tape delay, and that gets very important. And for a long time, I wanted to kill Frank Gifford. And you'll understand why in a minute. So I go to bet the horse, and he's like 10 or 9 to 1 or something like that. And Unbridled was in the race, okay? And there was another really good horse in the race. I can't remember who it was, but it was Unbridled and this other really good horse. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm not going to bet this horse to win. I'm going to make a killing here. I'm going to bet $500 exacta Festin on top of Unbridled and $500 exacta Festin on top of this other horse. And then I'm going to take $100 triple Festin with Unbridled, the other horse, with everybody else in the third slot. And I'm going to kill him. Okay. And that's what I did. Because I figured if I'm right and he wins Unbridled, the Derby winner, or the other good horse who I can't remember his name, one of them has to be second. It's like, can't not be, you know? So I go back home, all right? And I'm watching sports and I'm waiting for the Wide World of Sports. And I'm like, honey, if this horse wins, we're going furniture shopping and we're not going to like Bears. We're going to like Roche Bobo, okay? We're going like, this is going to be beautiful. And she's just giving me that look that women can give you. So before the race comes on, okay, idiot Frank Gifford, I forget what was on Wide World of Sports. Some of those says, oh, and this just in. We'll be showing the race later, but this just in from Oaklawn Park. Festin upsets the Oaklawn Handicap with a record exactor and triple payout. We'll show the race after this. Next guy skis down the mountain or whatever the case may be. So I'm like, yes, we won. And I'm high-fiving her. I'm like, we're going shopping. This is the greatest. Blah, blah, blah. And sure enough, they put the race on. And here's the tape delay from Oaklawn Park. And Early Fires goes out to the lead on a horse named Primal, Taunton stable horse, by about 8-9 lengths at Oaklawn Park. And what I didn't know when I bet, like I said, it's simultaneous, it was pouring. The track was sloppy as could be. And he's out there by 8-9 lengths, okay? And what Frank Gifford had said, exactly, I remember it now, he said, Festin upsets the Oaklawn Handicap, beats Unbridled for a record exactor and triple payoff. So in my mind, Unbridled second. There's no question about it. He said beats Unbridled, the Derby winner. This horse Primal's out there by 10 lengths. And I'm like watching this race, and I know the results, but now they're on the backstretch, and he's out there winging early fires by 10, and looks bad for Festin. I'm like, how is he possibly going to win from there? Let alone, I mean, just, you know, this is a disaster, but don't have to worry. He won. Sure enough, they turn for home. He comes flying on the outside. Unbridled Primal doesn't quit. He nails Primal, wins the race, pays like $17, $18, whatever it is. Primal was a big long shot, which is why he triggered the record exacta and triple payoff at the time. And Unbridled is still running. I don't know where he. So all the money's lost. Boom! Don't cash your ticket. Got greedy. My horse won. Didn't cash your ticket. Try explaining that to your wife who doesn't bet, who got a credit card advance to give you the money to bet. Try and explain that. You can't do it. Okay.
Oh, man.
It's a major disaster, but it goes to, I was right. I knew he'd like that other track. I knew he would go as well on that other track, but disaster. One of my worst racing beats ever. You can win and lose at the same time in this game, as obviously I just illustrated.
Yeah, you picked that horse out, Festin. You knew once he got to the track he wanted, he'd do it, and that's my dad's an old school player, so he's like, why are you wasting it in these exotics when you got the right horse? Because you could.
Why didn't I bet 1,000 to win and smaller exactas and pick up 10, 12,000?
Yeah. Cover both. Just got greedy, got stupid. And paid the price. And that was a long night. I think I locked myself in the empty walk-in closet. Don't bother me. I said, I'm not coming out until I decide to go kill Frank Gifford, because I still to this day don't understand why he said upsets Unbridled. If Unbridled didn't run second, I was like, doesn't this guy know anything about horse racing? He should have said beats Primal, not Unbridled. Yeah.
But I hated Frank Gifford for years because of that. I think I still dislike him. God rest him.
Is there any final thoughts on conditions, condition book, claiming races? Is there anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I think it's enlightening. I think the people that don't understand it'll have a little better idea and realize that it is important to look at the conditions of the race and see why a horse is eligible for a particular race or why a horse might not be eligible for a particular race. And
one of the things that, good trainers, and a classic example is Bobby Frankel. A lot of times he was known to enter very good. And so they would say, he won the race at the draw. It was by entering his horse in the best spot. So yeah, you got to run the race and you got to have no traffic trouble and stuff like that. But if your horse is consistently 4 to 5, 2 to 1 favorite, and they're always in the good race or good spots, they got a better chance to win. They just have a better chance to win.
Now, one question I will say, a lot of times I'll hear trainers say about a racing secretary, oh, he writes a really good book, or he doesn't write such a good book, or I hate the way that guy writes the book. What is that like about?
So I think what they're often saying is you have some racing secretaries that like to work with the horsemen, and they have an open door policy. Let me know if there's a race you need, or I could put it up as an extra, and they can write the extra. But if only 2 or 3 horses enter, then the race doesn't go. If the race puts it on as an extra and enough horses go in the race, they'll use that race oftentimes. Sometimes their hands are a little tied because certain races, like high allowance races, have a high purse on it, and they have to be within a purse structure per day. But for the most part, racing secretaries that are really liked by horsemen are ones that work with the horsemen. They enter the horse, they write the races as needed. They ride them so that guys can get their horses in more often. And sometimes racing secretaries have to know, if you're riding a high level allowance non-winners at 3, there's really not that many that are just maybe a touch below the stakes races, the stakes horses on the grounds. And so there might only be 5 or 6. So they're going to have to go with a small field because that's all they have in that inventory of horses, in that section of horses. But you have a bottom maiden claimer. I think you see a 12 or 14 horse race almost every time at a lot of the big tracks. The other thing is with racing secretaries is, I think if people get to run their horses, whether they're trainers or owners, some jurisdictions, horses don't get to run 2 months, 2.5 months, and they don't get to run. That's when the trainers and especially the owners start to get frustrated and say, look, I can't get my horse in. I can't get him in a race. Or, sometimes you have to adjust as a trainer or an owner. We have to run a level or two lower than we want, or we have to run a level or two higher than we want. So sometimes if we run lower, we may lose our horse and we didn't want to. And sometimes we have to run it higher just to get it to run. And then it's too high. It's higher odds. It's not as competitive in the race as it would have been. And so I think when things are clicking, and this goes for a trainer as it does a jockey or an owner, but especially for a trainer, when you have a horse that doesn't like to go much over 5.5, that race that you need comes up at the distance you need. When things are going your way, it happens time and time again, right in a row. When things are out of sync, you got a 5.5 horse that really can't go much farther than that, and your race comes up 6.5 or 7 furlongs, or 7 furlongs, and then 6 furlongs. And you're just like, boy, I need 5.5. So I either have to wait 3 times that race goes by, which could be 6 to 8 weeks, or I got to run it at not the best distance for that particular horse. So sometimes it's a catch-22. But when you need the races and they come up as extras and the distance you need and the horse is ready, we don't have to wait that week of delay like we talked earlier in the show. That's when you're clicking on all cylinders for your horse, for the jockey you're using, and for your owners. So that's when you're in a good groove. And you'll see trainers get on just like hitters. They're hitting really well. Football players are completing a lot of passes. And trainers are getting their horses in the right spots, and they're winning a lot of races in bunches, just like jockeys do sometimes.
One last thing on this subject, because I think it's interesting. I'll use Bob Baffert as an example because it came up on a conversation the other day. But he had a maiden in a race, I don't remember his name, that was highly regarded. And he had another horse in the race that was a little lesser regarded. Now, I feel Bob might be a bad example because he's got so many horses, he's got to run against each other, But somebody made a comment, well, if this horse was that good, why would he enter another horse in the race? And like I said, Bob might not be the best example, but one of the things I thought of is, sometimes trainers enter a horse in a race just to make the race go. They have a horse they want to run and they're pointing for that race, but it might not go. So they'll enter a second horse to assure the race of going. And we all know sometimes the second horse can win, but explain that. What is it when a trainer, has a horse in a race and enters another horse to get a race to go?
Yeah, sometimes I think if you see a shorter field, like a 5 or 6 horse field, that I think is where, hey, the horse, we wanted to make sure the race went. We entered another horse in there and the race went. If you see an 8, 9, 10 horse field and you have 2 horses in there, I'm thinking that you might have been thinking of a horse called Bezos. And the fact that he was kind of named after the Amazon, the guy that owns Amazon, it made him even highlier touted. He was just working really well in the morning. I think the other thing, when you have a big powerhouse stable like Baffert has, I think, so he's got 2 in that maiden special weight, but he's also going to have 2 for the next maiden special weight. If he only ran 1 at a time, it would take him 4 races to get all 4 of those in. And you have to keep those owners happy that own the other 3 horses, not just the highly regarded one. So I think has to run sometimes 2 at a time and sometimes 3 at a time. Because the other thing, I think Baffert's program is geared towards winning first time out, and those horses oftentimes win first time out. And then if the second or third entry that he has in that race runs second or third, they're sitting on a win next time. But I think it really comes down to, so Bob Baffert primarily runs on the Southern California circuit. But if you see like a Godolphin operation, well, they don't want to have 4 3-year-old maiden special weights. So they might have 2 in California, 2 in Tampa, 2 in Gulfstream, 2 in Kentucky. That way they're not running 8 3-year-old colts, trying to get them all in at the same time.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. And we all know that horses can fool anybody at any time. Like I said, sometimes you put a horse in to fill a race and that horse beats the horse that, you were going. Sharp outfit. okay, any sharp outfit that has a lot of horses, what would you say, and you could be roundabout, how high of a percentage of the time when a trainer, sharp trainer, not just any, a sharp trainer, has multiple horses in a race, 50%, 75%, 60%, 90%, how much percentage of the time do they know the better horse or who's much more likely to win?
I think that, they know who's training better, and from the program who is lower odds. But oftentimes it's the form coming into the race, how they're training up to it, what their past form looks like. And I think the barn knows, a lot of times, maybe a jockey rides for this particular trainer and he's like their main guy, right? And that sometimes is another tell sign. Okay, the main guy for Chad Brown or the main guy for Bob Frankel is, or Bob Baffert, that is, and maybe his main go-to jockey. Which one is he on of those three? That is he, especially if he jumps off one of the other ones to go ride it. So I think some of those things are, but how does the barn know they're going to do? They know how they're training into the race. They know on paper how that they should be the better horse. But I think one of the reasons that you put two horses in a maiden race or a stake race is, well, the stake race, both horses are eligible and you're representing those clients. So they know their horses fit in that race and they want to run in there. But which one's going to run better sometimes comes down to the trip they get, the post position they get, the traffic trouble they encounter or don't encounter. And the same thing happens in those maiden races. One could be highly regarded, stumbles at the start, getting dirt in his face. He's had it in the mornings, but it's nothing like the afternoon. And he just doesn't run the way he was training in the morning. Or the horse bleeds for the first time, really hot day. And they just never saw it. The horse never did that in the morning. And then in the afternoon, they scope him and he displaced, or he has a breathing problem, or he bled. So there's a lot of things that after the race that we hear a day or two later, like, hey, I heard this horse, this happened to it. And the more highly regarded the horses are, the more you hear what happened. But, an odd 10 claimer, sometimes they don't know, hey, what happened? That horse, he came out a little sore or whatever, and he didn't run like he should have because of that. But you don't really hear that. But when you get the post-race interviews or a day later, oh, so-and-so came out with their first grade 1 win in good shape and they're doing good. That's, a little bit of information of what the horse did. But I think the barn knows how they're doing, but you still got to run the race. And that's why sometimes the favorites get beat, because even though they're the best horse in the race, they don't get the best trip. And ultimately a higher odd horse will win.
Yeah, no, interesting stuff. I mean, we're going a little beyond our schedule. Do you want to go into the topic 2 about the claiming being good for the sport, or you want to hold that till our next show? What do you think?
I think we can hold it to our next show. I want to keep the fans wanting a little something. We want them to come back and see the next show. One of the last things that I'll add to the with two horses in a race is, as a trainer, the perfect scenario is you have one horse that likes to go to the lead and one horse likes to come from behind. Oftentimes in a maiden race, they might be two unraced horses. They don't quite have a style yet, so they both might break good, and hopefully they don't wear each other out going head and head. But sometimes you see it happening. You'll see a trainer coming down the lane is like, well, he's going to win. It's just a matter of which one's he going to win with. But then you feel bad for the owner of the second horse that just gets nipped, because you're really happy for the winning owner and the winning trainer and the jockey, but you're bittersweet that your other horse ran second and ran a winning effort but got beat. So there's scenarios where, like you said, this one's helped fill the race. This one is a speed horse. This one's a closer. They're not going to bother each other, and so there's times when you could have two in the race, and it's not a bad thing. And sometimes it gives you two chances in the same race, like I said, instead of having to wait till that condition comes back around. And so those are kind of my thoughts on the condition book. Those are some of my thoughts on why horses are entered together. And, I'm really sorry about Frank Gifford and your bad beat.
Well, there you have it. According to Jeff, the barn most of the time knows the better one. They don't always win, but they know the better one most of the time, and there are tells you can look for.
I think as a player, do you think that sometimes what happens is the tote board, especially the last 1 to 2 minutes before a race, I think the tote board will give you a little bit of who the barn likes or who they've spoken highly of.
I think that the following the money is generally a good idea in racing and many other avenues of life as well. So yeah, I think that is definitely a tell, following the money. But like we said on an earlier show, a lot of times we will see the longer priced of the trainers horses win. It does happen.
We talked about that on our first show, and the next day, 2 horses from a trainer at Golden Gate. He had 2 horses in both races. The higher odds won both times.
It happens.
And I saw it happen with Bob Baffert over the weekend. Yeah.
And with some trainers, it seems to happen more than others. I think it's it's just horse racing. It humbles everybody, at some point, which is why I said, what percentage of time do you think they know? And you indicated that most of the time they know, but that doesn't automatically mean that most of the time that'll be the one that wins. It's just
they know who's training better, who's doing good, and who's just the better horse if all things are equal. But once that gate opens, sometimes all things aren't equal.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's one of the many things we love about this sport. On our next show, we're going to talk about something that's probably going to provoke a lot of thought from our viewers and probably get Jeff and I into some interesting conversations, because I'm sure we're both passionate about it and have ideas about it. But we're going to talk about the claiming aspect of racing and whether or not it's good for the sport as a whole, whether or not it's good for the horses, owners, trainers, and the positives and negative aspects of the claiming game. And we're going to look at how it's done in some other areas that don't have claiming and see how it, parallels and corresponds to our way of doing things here. And I think that's a really interesting subject. I've got some, thoughts on it. I'm sure you do as well. It's something I've thought about in my mind for a long time. And I think it's a very interesting subject, and it'll lead us into a lot of other interesting subjects and conversations.
Yeah, definitely. So I just want to shout out and say thank you, Jon, for doing this. I want to thank the people out there that have been following us and watching our show. And like Jon said early on, it's very exciting to watch the views and the numbers that we're getting. People seem to like it. They're sending us comments, and hey, you have a topic, let us know, and we'll dive into it, and we'll be as candid as possible, and we'll tell it like it is. And that's what we like to do, and we're here for you.
Right. And if between us we don't know and can't find out, then probably nobody else can either. So
yeah. There you go.
Good shot. We'll be able to get to the bottom of it. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate all the support and all the love, and enjoy the races, and we will be back soon. Ciao for now.
Bye.
Horses have reached the starting gate. It's post time. Cold front, the favorite comes forward. And they're into the stretch. Cold front put to the 10. Cold front does it again. Right in the field of the Amsterdam.